Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say to all three of you again that I so much admire the good work that you do and the organizations you all represent. They're three outstanding organizations, and those of us who have been on this committee for many, many, many years are very aware of the fine work you do. So I want to reiterate that and thank all three of you. Mr. Chairman, before I ask my question, I'd like unanimous consent to enter into the record a document by the Democracy in Europe Working Group signed by over 60 former administration officials and members of Congress, democracy experts, and human rights activists, which lays out growing concerns regarding democratic backsliding in Europe.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask my first question involving something I said in my opening statement, and I've been saying for the past year and a half on this committee, as have we all on both sides of the aisle. That's the budget. That's woefully inadequate. So let me start with you, Mr. Gershman. We understand the critical importance of the NED's work and that of NDI and IRI around the world. The budget proposal for fiscal year 2019 requested $67 million for NED, which is a 60% cut from the amount, which is $170 million, that Congress has appropriated yearly since FY16. Not only did the FY19 budget of the administration gut NED's funding, it also took aim at Congress's funding of your four core institutes. Again, NDI, IRI, the Center for International Private Enterprise, and the Solidarity Center. Let me ask, what effect would the drastic budget proposal have on your ability to fund democracy activities? And if the budget became law, what would you have to cut? And how do you prioritize when the needs are so great?
Thank you very much for that question. I mean, there are obviously two fundamental problems with the OMB budget request for fiscal 2019, the amount and separating us from the four institutes. And both of these are devastating. I don't even want to get into now what we would have to cut. They're devastating, utterly devastating. It would virtually kill the whole program. And it's based upon, in my view, just a failure to understand what we do and the value of what we do. And I should point out to you, Congressman Engel, that we are in close touch with the NSC, with OMB, to try to talk about these issues. It's partly an educational process. It's also political. And to try to explain why NED is both effective and cost-effective. Effective, I think, because we have a multi-sectoral structure. It's also labor and business that is part of this, in addition to our political parties, with the civil society groups that the NED supports directly, which is a broad and extremely effective and also cost-effective operation. Cost-effective because we're not imposing things on people. We're supporting bottom-up processes. We're responding to demands that are on the ground, finding the best groups and helping them. And so this is something that works. And I think Congress understands, as I look around this committee, Congress understands that this is something effective. And in a way, we've always been an institution of the Congress. I look at Dante on the wall and Tom Lantos and Henry Hyde, Ben Gilman, Ileana. I mean, you people have understood what this is all about from the very, very beginning. And we do have a problem now in terms of explaining this and educating a new generation who don't necessarily have the same history. And this is something we have to do. And things like we did last night when we brought these leaders of 4 North Korean NGOs to the Congress and got them around so people could meet them to see what they do with the defector organizations. North Koreans who've defected from North Korea, who are now working both to rescue people and also to reach into North Korea with information, breaking down the communications blockade, the information blockade that the regime in North Korea has established. When people understand this in concrete terms and see how far small grants can go in assisting people who are on the front lines of the struggle for freedom, I believe we're going to get that support, and we just have to keep fighting that.
Thank you. Several formerly democratic countries, as I mentioned in my statement, opening statement, have moved in a decisively autocratic direction over the last several years, from Turkey to Venezuela to Russia. Authoritarian leaders are diminishing democratic space, squelching the free press, and undermining the independence of their judiciaries. So let me ask Mr. Twining, Mr. Wallach, can your organizations function in these and other countries which have backslid so far? Is there ample latitude for effective employment of democracy promotion in places like these?
Sir, there is. Some of the work has to be offshore. Obviously, all of it is in very tough conditions. We also need to play a long game. And I'll give you another example. You mentioned some backslipping. But in Malaysia, IRI has been working with the opposition there since 2002. Malaysia was essentially a one-party majoritarian state. The ruling party had ruled since 1957. It had gerrymandered all the districts, given itself every advantage. But in this last election, a month ago, the opposition won for the first time in 60-something years. And that was an example of playing the long game, right? We, the United States, supported a democratic opposition that is now in charge of this very strategic country, right there on the front lines of the South China Sea, right there on the front lines of the Islamic world's intersection with the rest of Asia, and that's good for America. So we look at a country like Russia, and we see a leader who looks very strong, but frankly who is very brittle and frankly quite insecure. And we know that Russians would like to have a choice and a different future, a much more European and prosperous future than he can offer them.
Mr. Wallach?
Let me just say, operating in the so-called semi-authoritarian regimes, in which you have the forms of democracy, you have elections, you have political parties, you have civil society groups, some media, but in fact, one party, one individual, one family controls all aspects of society and all political institutions. In many of these places, this is the most challenging environments to work, and what we do is we work in these environments with civil society, with political actors, and find reformist elements within the ruling elite and work with them. Sometimes, however, we become the canaries in the coal mine. When the governments want to crack down, fear any diffusion of political power, we become the victims of that, along with those on the ground, in places like Azerbaijan and places like Russia. And as Dan said, we have begun to work offshore in these places using long-distance learning, bringing people out. We use technology so they can share information among themselves. And sometimes in places like Belarus, you can reach more people this way too, where literally hundreds of thousands of people are being reached by these methods. But it's a challenge. But, you know, things change. You know, nothing is constant. In Armenia, for example, now there is a welcoming and an opening for the international community to return, to help institutions, newly created institutions, helping the government reform, to communicate. And so, ultimately speaking, we play the long game in all of this. We understand that this is a process. It's not a destination, and democracy isn't linear. But I think there have been many places where we were not welcome, but we have returned as openings took place.
Ileana Ross-Leitonen.
Thank you so much, Chairman Royce and Ranking Member.